through that lens, I started questioning what really happened with that, and then you start asking all these other questions, like what happened with Tibet, what happened with Taiwan, what happened with all this stuff, what happened with the Uyghurs, what happened in Russia, what happened in Afghanistan, what happened in Yemen, what happened in Syria, what happened in Somalia, Libya, what happened there.
Right.
The list goes on, and
it's almost like the facts only exist to be molded by the media, right? Like they take this raw material, which is the truth, and then they mold it like clay, and they put it into whatever shape they want it to be in, so that the American people see what they want them to see. A lot of times they even know that they're telling you something that is complete bullshit, and that you will know that. They know that you know that what they're telling you isn't the truth, but they're going to tell you anyway.
The not test is, you take a claim, you take the negation of that claim, and you ask yourself, would anybody in good faith disagree with the negation of this claim? Let me give you an example. You made a really good point. You said, like, yeah, okay, there's truth, right? Which is what happens. Yeah. And then there's propaganda, which is what's stifled through. How does your country or how does your media filter that and put it to your words? So I'll give you one example. And I talked about it earlier at the top of the show. So there might be like a YouTube, for context, little misinformation container below our video.
Yeah, link to a Wikipedia article. Yeah.
Right. So that's what really happened in Tiananmen Square, right? So like that whole situation is like, okay, as a Westerner, as somebody who grew up in the United States, I was taught this, that, and the other happened there. I was taught, hey, at Tiananmen Square, this happened. Okay. And I was like, oh, that's a fact. And then I listened to that System of a Down song, Hypnotize or whatever.
Kids? Yeah.
Exactly. And I'm like, okay, so maybe there's a little bit. Then I was like, okay, this is what happened at Tiananmen. I know exactly what happened there. Little to my knowledge, I didn't even know what propaganda was because I was just a kid. So then I grew up. I'm going to college, and I've got a Chinese classmate. Becomes a close friend of mine. Actually, we become roommates. I start talking to him, and I'm like, hey man, so what happened at Tiananmen Square? Boom. Immediately he puts his phone on airplane mode, grabs my phone, puts my phone on airplane mode, and says, hey, we'll talk about it. And so he gets into his version of it, and I'm like, interesting. That's a completely different version than what I was taught, when I was a kid. So it made me think, what else was I taught differently than what they're taught? And what is a third-party source that doesn't have a vested interest in the other country's general morale going down, right? So what I mean by that is the United States has a vested interest in the general consensus of China going down. So, and I don't agree with that, but that's what the United States' strategy is, right?
Right.
So through that lens, I started questioning what really happened with that, and then you start asking all these other questions, like what happened with Tibet, what happened with Taiwan, what happened with all this stuff, what happened with the Uyghurs, what happened in Russia, what happened in Afghanistan, what happened in Yemen, what happened in Syria, what happened in Somalia, Libya, what happened there?
Right.
But the list goes on, and as we said earlier, there's too much details to get into. But kicking it over to you, did you have an aha moment where you kind of had a version of events that transpired in your life, and then you kind of looked into it further and said, hey, I was lied to by my government or by my media?
So it didn't happen in my lifetime, but the thing that really woke me up to this is a very good book that I would recommend strongly to anybody. It's called Manufacturing Consent by Noam Chomsky and one other guy, I forget his name, but we've already sorry to that guy. I think he's dead. My bad. Anyway, I think we already said that term, manufacturing consent, before, and I think it's a beautiful term. And if you're confused about what it means, it's that consent of the governed, which is basically what allows the government to control us, is because we let them do it, right? That consent has to be manufactured. You have to build that up. Basically the government has to do something to prove that they're worthy of that control. So Manufacturing Consent is just a fantastic book that they think they focus mostly on the Vietnam War, but they talk about other things. And I read their analysis and their breakdown of the facts of what actually happened during the Vietnam War, and compared to the way the media portrayed it, and it's not the same story, right? And I don't just mean like the details are different. I mean the entire story is different. Every fact was manipulated, twisted, to keep the American public in a certain frame of view. And it's almost like the facts only exist to be molded by the media, right? Like they take this raw material, which is the truth, and then they mold it like clay, and they put it into whatever shape they want it to be in, so that the American people see what they want them to see. This is how the media and the government work in tandem with this. I mean, you literally have, think about this: the White House press corps. right? And very recently, there's been a big change to this, which I'm very supportive of. But the White House press corps, in order to get credentialed access to join the press corps, and this is, by the way, this is who's in the conference room when the whoever the spokesperson for the White House is like speaking and giving the news items of the day. The people in that room, in order to get in there, you have to be approved by the people in the room. Well, this is how it used to work. It used to be that the White House press corps chose their own members, right? Which, how does that? Why? Why would the media have control over who gets to become the media? Right. That's basically what they did, and
Right.
this is very recently changed. Again, I think is a huge victory, but this is kind of how the media works. The government has their little stenographers, right? And the government will even give them power. It's like throwing a treat to your dog. It's like, hey, you've been a good little servant of mine. Here's a little morsel of power, and as long as you use it to benefit me, right? Which I'm giving you this power, so I know you're not going to let anybody in here who would contradict me or say anything I don't want them to say. Because if you do that, I'm going to take this power away from you. So
Right.
here's a little crumb, use it wisely, and maybe I'll give you more. Right? This is what the media does. They're like the lapdogs of the people who are truly in power, and it's all a trickle down from there. You have academia doing the same kind of thing. In order to get grants, in order to fund their research, in order to get bigger endowments, they they churn out students who are lemmings, who are very compliant. This happens in the corporate world. If I want tax breaks, if I want to lobby the government, I better be on my dotting my I's and crossing my T's. I better make sure I'm in lockstep with whatever they want from me. So this is a power structure that goes through every facet of society.
No, and it's interesting you bring it up like that because just recently there was a lawsuit, I believe, from the Associated Propaganda, the Associated Press.
Yeah.
They weren't allowed in some capacity of the White House media kind of room because they weren't admitting that they weren't calling it the Gulf of America. I don't know if you heard about this little
Right.
story.
Yes, that's right.
But
Yep.
they had to sue the White House and say, hey, like this, that, and the other, like they gotta let us in because they didn't want to capitulate and say like, oh, it's actually called the Gulf of America. I agree.
Right.
Why is it that there's so many things that the government will say like, hey, this is what happened, and then 90% of people will say, well, that didn't happen like that. This is what I think
Right.
happened. And why are
Yeah.
those people demonized with like the word conspiracy theorists?
Absolutely. Well, it's about how consent is manufactured, right? So the government gives you, and here's the thing: a lot of times they even know that they're telling you something that is complete bullshit, and that you will know that. They know that what they're telling you isn't the truth, but they're going to tell you anyway because the point is, here's the bullshit, and we're never going to say anything else about it ever again. Here's a lie. You live with it. It's no longer my problem. It's on you now. And I'm going to wash my hands of it. And they know that the media and that the people who consume the media, the people who are on Reddit, are going to gobble up that lie. There's going to be a certain percentage of the people that just believe everything that they're told. They're going to gobble it up and they're going to become the majority because that's the simple, easy narrative. Oh, I wonder what happened with Jeffrey Epstein. Let me Google it. Let me hop on Google real quick. Yeah, enable cookies, please do. Yeah, get those on there. Okay, let's see. We got. According to CNN, he just he offed himself in prison. Jeez. Well, he must have been really depressed. He must have been. I get it though, because hey, you're going to prison for a long time. He was not a good person. So anyway, what's for dinner, honey? Right? And they go on with their lives. And now the next day they're at work and they're talking with Peter, who's a little red pilled and he's hiding his power level a little bit. And then Epstein comes up, and Peter's like, "Well, he obviously didn't kill himself." And then Joe's here's like, "Well, yes, he did. I read that yesterday on the news, and the news would never lie to me." He says, "No, he didn't kill himself. He was murdered. He was murdered because he was a part of a blackmail operation, and the people in power needed to shut him up, and they didn't want him speaking and going to trial and all this evidence." Well, let me stop you right there, buddy. Blackmail? What are you, some kind of conspiracy theorist? Well, this is all just ridiculous to me. You sound like Alex Jones. I'm cutting this
Right.
off. I don't want to hear this anymore.
Right.
And that's
Right.
how it goes. And now Peter won't talk about that subject anymore because
And you
he
get
doesn't want to be
debanked,
fired.
deplatformed, de-et-cetera for just
Exactly.
saying what you think is true.
Exactly. So the power it reinforces itself at every level, and this is what the government needs, and the media needs is they need obedient lemmings who are just going to swallow the narrative, and the work takes care of itself. I mean, these people
Right.
work for the government and the media for free, as we said last time. They work for free.
And I want to tie in what how you're because you're talking about manufacturing consent right now, and I want to tie that into something that I think is an important concept, and that is called the not test. So basically, the government does this a lot, and people do this in everyday life as well. They'll make a claim that doesn't pass the not test, just so that they can have some type of ground for statements in an argument to move forward. So, what is the not test? The not test is what you do is you take a claim, you take the negation of that claim, and you ask yourself, would anybody in good faith disagree with the negation of this claim? So, let me give you an example. So, the not test would be something like, hey, we must take action against Iran because we need to protect our national security. So the negation of that would say, hey, we should not take action against Iran and instead endanger our national security. So would anybody on earth agree with the negation?
Oh, of course not. No.
Of course not, right? So that claim does not pass the not test. However, it is used as a way to kind of say, oh yeah, this, so much this, because it's agreeable. It's so agreeable that everyone is going to agree with it, and it's going to make you sound smart and make you sound profound, and you can go on and therefore use any justification to manufacture consent. And the example I gave is exactly what was told to us, in recent events. But it was told this has happened many times by the government, where they give you a claim in my mind that doesn't pass the not test, and then they go talk further. But in real life, when somebody tells me something that doesn't pass the not test, I just say, hey, I call it a truism. I just say, hey, that's just like a truism. Like, what do you?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, okay. The sky is blue. Yeah, I agree with you. 1 +1 is 2.
Yeah.
Like, no one's going to disagree that 1 + 1 is not 2, right? So it's like, why did you say that? And that's why I have limited, like, I've kind of, in some ways, a lot of my peers don't even like to give their opinions to me because they know I'm going to, and I'm not doing it to be an asshole. I'm just doing it because that's how I operate. I will actually apply the not test, and I'll actually question them. And it's to a point where if I say something like, what do you mean by that? Just that alone, they'll say, good point. Instead of going down the explanation, they'll just say good point because they've already know that they don't know what they mean by that. So it's such a point where I need to refrain myself from even saying that. I can even make a face. They say, hey, this, that, and the other. Putin is so evil, and I'll just say, and they'll say good point. That's it. That's all I have to do now.
Just the eyebrows. Yeah.
So it's like, kicking it over to you, like, what do you think about the not test, and where have you been able to kind of identify where that's applied as far as manufacturing consent or other aspects of life?
That's awesome. Yeah. You often introduce me to these new subjects. Like last week, it was the via negativa, which I loved, and the not test is phenomenal. I think that I had never heard of it in those terms before, but I definitely do it subconsciously, right? And I think maybe another way to put it, just to echo you, is like what you're really doing is you're treating everybody in the world, and especially people in power, as rational actors. So I mean, we've spent the last hour like really railing against like the government, but one thing that we haven't said and that we wouldn't say is that they're irrational. They're not irrational. They're very rational. Like they have a perspective and a point of view. They want to maintain their power, and everything they do is connected to that. So they're rational actors, but that leads them to lie to you. Their rationalism leads them to do that. So what you're doing is you're saying to yourself, when you hear, let's say, for example, we must defend Ukraine because we have to preserve democracy. Okay. Is there anybody especially in the Western countries, that's going to say we should not preserve Ukraine because democracy is bad? Is there anybody that's going to say that?
Perfect example.
Right.
Perfect example of the not.
Nobody would say that. So right off the bat,
not even us. We won't even say that.
See. Right. You can see how thin and how stupid that justification really is. Like, that can't be the real thing. Like, if it's a legitimate point of view, then there must also be a legitimate counter view to it. Otherwise, you can tell it's been made up, right? I think that's and so I'll try to put that into practice. So if, let's say, you hear from Putin, right? Let's apply the not test to Putin's perspective here. Putin says, I don't like NATO on my border because they make me feel unsafe, and I feel like they're threatening my people. Okay, the not test to that is, well, we're not threatening your people. Okay, both of those are perfectly legitimate. Both of those are very understandable points of view. So right away, you can understand that Putin is giving a legitimate opinion, right? Whether he personally really believes it or not is different, but at least what he's saying is something that is, you can take
passes
it
the not test.
And yes, and you can react to it and you can deal with it because there's a substance to it. What's up, guys? Thanks for checking out this clip from the Maneuver Life podcast. If you enjoyed it, consider liking and subscribing and leaving a comment. even if it's just because you want to tell us how dumb you think we are, but especially if you want to tell us how much you agree with what we were saying. We have weekly uploads every single Monday, long form conversations just like this one. So consider checking it out one way or the other. Thank you so much for your attention. You have a good rest of your day.